afternoon and welcome. We're excited to continue a Techlandia Summit programming and welcome members of the Global Cities Team Challenge to today's Q&A session. I'm Riley O'Brien, Vice President of Events and Experiences with the Technology Association of Oregon, and I'll be your facilitator of this session as well as coordinating back-end support on this Zoom call. As a couple of rules of engagement before we start, we've asked that all participants are muted and remain muted until you're called on by myself or by Pam to ask your question. You're also welcome to respond to questions in the chat box publicly. If you want to send a direct message to me, you could do that as well. And we all ask that you participate using nonverbal communication using the participant icon. Please engage with us on social media during this session. We're excited to share what's happening throughout Techlandia Summit and to get participant takeaways from our events. This session is also being recorded and will be found on TAO's YouTube within 24 hours of this event. A huge thank you goes out to all of the investors in Techlandia Summit. We appreciate their sponsorship and we're excited to explore topics related to economic resiliency, future of work, human factors, and mobilities throughout this week. And finally, it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter for this afternoon, Pamela Gupta, President and CEO of OutSecure, Inc. Pamela, you just let me know when you're ready for your slide.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm very happy to talk to you about the GCTC CPAC COVID-19 Resource Kit. This is just a brief history of how it came about. When the pandemic started, we were faced with a lot of different, very, very different environment. And, frankly, there was a lot of people who were scared about things such as, besides operational issues in business, about life itself. And as president of a small company, my thoughts were, I was very distracted by the pandemic and thinking about the social distancing, how are we going to achieve that at a scalable basis, and put my normal operations aside and started thinking about what I can do to leverage my skills for cybersecurity and privacy and really help the community at large be able to prepare for this pandemic. That's started doing that on a business basis for my own clients. And then as a member of CPAC, I was asked by SOCWO if I wanted to lead the task force for GCTC CPAC COVID-19 task force. And so I kind of put aside what I was doing for my own business for my clients and started working on this resource toolkit for a broader community. So the reason for putting this is, as organizations faced with this new environment, there was what I felt were 4 different types of communities with a similar risk and similar requirements, but because of who they are, would have different ways and solutions of meeting those risks. So the 4 communities I wanted to focus on were organizations such as businesses, cities and municipalities and schools, etc., first responders, hospitals, as well as self-employed gig workers. So that's basically a little bit of context on what led to this resource toolkit. Next slide, please.
Hold on, I'm gonna move to your PowerPoint completely. Hold on.
So we'll just go to the first slide, Riley. So this is the GCTC CPAC COVID-19 Resource Kit, and we're going to talk about why people need it. Why do organizations and individuals need it, and how to use it? Next slide, please. So what we have seen coming out of the pandemic is the largest work from home remote workforce environment. And this has influenced organizational risk because the operational environment has drastically changed. And what we are also seeing as a risk professional, for instance, speaking for myself, that we are talking about a new definition of risk. The definition of risk itself has changed. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, what that means. But the biggest takeaway for that is because the risks have changed, the risk operational environment has changed, the risk conversation has changed, what we were using to deal with risk in the past will not work anymore. So we are faced with a new environment. And so what does that mean from a resilience perspective as well as a security and privacy perspective? Next slide, please. So some of the new strategies, policies, and security requirements that we talk about, one slide back, please, really, is whether you are a large company, a small entity, regardless if you are, which sector you're in, the operational environment changes means that the risks and the threat models that dictate how you react to them has changed. So for example, if you're a large company, for instance, and you had VPN set up for accessing your network environment, that was on a limited basis, right? Now we're looking at the entire workforce has been behind that VPN and looking to get access to the data centers, and that is increasingly putting a lot of firstly strain on the infrastructure. Infrastructure may not exist to even support that kind of usage. And thirdly, since everybody's out on the internet and doing remote access, the kind of policies we need, the kind of security awareness we need for employees, the kind of attacks we are seeing coming to this infrastructure has rapidly been evolving as well. So this has led to, as you can imagine, changes in data handling, wireless security. Why do I have that there? Instead of using a very well-defined infrastructure in a company setup, which is managed by IT, now as individuals are using their own wireless connections from home, that itself has become an issue that needs to be looked at. Wireless security has traditionally not been the easiest point to tackle when it comes to from a user perspective, because there are things such as how to secure your router. These are not things normal typically users are thinking about. And now if you are introducing items and devices on that wireless network which may not have security, such as even Internet of Things devices, for instance, which we may be broadcasting the wireless password in the clear. Now you're looking at how that is becoming very quickly enmeshed into a organization's security structure. Also, we're looking at non-employee device usage, printing of, let's say, example, printing of confidential data. If as an organization you had rules and regulations around which printers to use for printing confidential data, now those rules are not going to apply. And if individuals are printing this at home, who has access to that data? Again, is that printer itself on the wireless network, which may not be secure? So these are the kind of issues we are faced with in this environment. Network segregation, that's typically exists in a well laid out data center or a company network. One would not have access to that in a home network. Large companies are seeing a lot of security exceptions coming in, and the security teams have to figure out what those exceptions are, how to handle those requests, for instance, without jeopardizing the safety and security of the organization. just two more points before we move to the next slide. One is remote conferencing software, where this is a need that exists across those different communities I was talking about. The way the solutions are going to differ from a healthcare worker would have perhaps their needs can be met through a different solution than a business owner. And I'll give you an example of that when we go to US states guidance about how healthcare workers may have a different solution to their remote conferencing requirement. But when it comes to remote conferencing software for organizations, we have talked about, they've seen numerous alerts coming out around Zoom software, for instance, Zoom collaboration for video conferencing. And we are on a Zoom call right now. The problem there is not so much Zoom bombing that I'm concerned about. An example of that is a good video collaboration software, conferencing software would have end-to-end encryption. Zoom has end-to-end encryption, but those keys are being stored and sent to servers in China. So it is at their discretion. They could, the state of China could look at which conversations are of interest to them and decipher and decrypt them. So remote conferencing software, this is not an easy choice, but has to be made very, very carefully, especially if you're looking at scenarios where you may have very high restrictions on confidentiality. There are, of course, organizations such as US government does not even allow Zoom usage, but that does not mean that the employees cannot use Zoom software for private conversations, for instance. So again, it goes back to that threat model, which has changed because of that new working environment, where the single device could be used for secure and unsecure conversations as well as sessions. So last but not least on this slide, I just want to talk about a little bit about security, cloud security and adoption. What that means to different organizations is going to differ by the type of organization, the size of the organization. And one thing we are seeing is that cloud adoption has dramatically increased. And as you can imagine, from a risk perspective, where you ask a bank robber, why are you robbing a bank? Because that's where the money is. Well, guess what? Cloud security and adoption are extremely, extremely relevant to where the data is now, right? As a lot of the explosion of adopting the cloud is accompanied by that's where the perpetrators and the attackers will go. So we have to be very careful and cognizant of that. Okay, so next slide, please. So why did we create, what is this toolkit? Why do we need it? And what is the significance of that? So let me just minimize this window so I can see. Okay. So first, let me tell you what GCTC is. GCTC is Cybersecurity Privacy Advisory Council. Short term is CPAC acronym. It is a NIST-based public-private partnership. Riley, we're not done. You can go back to that. I am one of the CPAC leaders and was tasked with leading this task force, the COVID-19 task force for GCTC CPAC. Our vision is very simple. We want to provide a free and easy to adopt guidance for the 4 different types of communities I mentioned in the beginning, which is cities and communities, schools, etc., as well, businesses, first responders, and self-employed or gig workers. The requirements are going to be similar, solutions are going to be different. And therefore, we wanted to have a toolkit which lays out these communities separately and provides the operational guidance for them separately, as well as policies and anything that will help with business resilience. The toolkit is divided into 8 areas, and it is extremely comprehensive. Objective is to help the community on operational issues, cybersecurity best practices, and warnings on cyber attacks, especially those that are pertinent and unique to the environment that we're in, okay, which is work from home. Even for companies, organizations that are opening up, there are still, it's not, post-COVID is not going to be pre-COVID environment. And therefore, the environment we're in is going to be either existing in its entirety or in some shape or form. So whatever we're talking about here is not going to dramatically change, right? So we're not going to be able to go back and use those old strategies. We do have to adapt. So what are these common global challenges of operational resilience, profitability, for instance, changes in processes? What are they? What they include? What is the guidance required to operate in this environment, including how do we get back to work and how do we open up safely and securely? These are not as easy as and simple as just looking at hand sanitization or social distancing. There are other factors that come in, such as social distancing enforcement, for instance. If you're going to be bringing in tools, et cetera, for that, how does that impact the security and privacy? Is that done in a way that cannot be used against you going forward? So there are a lot of issues there, and so we have laid all of some of those out in the toolkit. Last but not least, cybersecurity is a very, very real and a critical issue that we are facing. In fact, FBI has called this the other coronavirus crisis, which is the cybersecurity and privacy risks and scams, which are coming up at an unprecedented rate and are extremely focused on this particular pandemic environment. Okay, next slide, please, Riley. So this is the toolkit I described and so far, and it has 8 areas, as I mentioned. We will share the link with you after the presentation, so you can take, you can look at how to take this and make this a part of your operational model and also your strategy. We have on the website, there is a how to use this toolkit. So whatever I'm describing to you, you can also would be able to look at it later. And we are so dependent on your feedback. We want to know if you are able to use this, what value it's providing to you, what feedback you have for us so that we can make this better and more usable. And I'm going to go through some of the salient points now, but we will share this link with you as to where this resides right now. The next slide, please, Rennie. So the first first area, on the toolkit is the resource toolkit for business. This is divided into 3 areas: informational, planning, and financial assistance. Now, I will just give you a quick intro as to what this section has. It is, again, just an example. We have many more resources on this website and under this particular resource toolkit for business. But let me just focus on one. For example, e-commerce. E-commerce, as you can imagine, has become a reality for a lot of businesses that were not even looking to enter into the e-commerce world just because of the environment that we're in. So what that means is if you're setting out in this journey, and I have numerous statistics that I can share with you on how e-commerce has jumped up across different sectors, not just groceries, for instance, in retail, for example, as well, etc. So this is a very, very real part of our new environment. We have resources on this website, on our toolkit, which talk about some of the tools that may be available for organizations to get up and running for maybe 6 months, try it out, see what model works for them, and also for taking payments, for example, free from certain vendors, for example. We see eBay up there. We also see Shopify, Yahoo Small Business. Yahoo is helping small businesses get online with free website resources for a year. There are caveats there. We have looked at it ourselves for putting this resource toolkit using one of these resources. So we are not just putting this together, we're also consuming this information ourselves. Okay, next slide, please. The next toolkit area is for cities and communities. This is organized by general awareness, planning, informational, and case studies. I'll just go over a case study that we got from the city of Coral Gables, who have provided us with, and this is on the toolkit, with a actual MO of a phishing attack that is very, very relevant to this environment. So MO is a method of operation, and the attack that they saw is heavily targeting those cloud-based sources that all organizations are going to be using for either for sharing documents, such as Dropbox, etc. Sharing those documents, as well as getting collaboration on those documents, as well as signing those documents, such as DocuSign. So they saw an attack come in, which was targeting basically one of those, Dropbox, fake DocuSign attacks of FTP, COVID-19 related sites. So they've gone through what the method of operation was and what other cities and communities can learn from this attack so that they can avoid this. Again, this is extremely, extremely valuable information for cities because this is the environment we are all operating in. Excuse me. Next slide, please. City resource toolkit for first responders. As you can imagine, this is a completely different type of the community section. And as I mentioned, the reason for separating out the communities by their function is because their operational environment is going to be very different. And so some of the resources we have listed here are from stakeholders who are involved in some of these organizations and are contributing this content, such as the resources from National Association of State EMS Officials and National Public Safety Telecom Council. There are many more resources there, depending on what your requirements might be if you are in this category of the community. Another case study that I want to highlight here is how first responders are leveraging smart city technology in the city of Coral Gables, Florida. And I'll just read this out to you. The Internet of Things provides City of Coral Gables with an interface to the physical world with real-time visibility over urban and environmental conditions, and using that situational awareness for faster response time, including for first responders. Next slide, please. US state case studies and guidance. This is for city, what the states are preparing based on their experience, and extremely, extremely valuable guidance, which will cut down the time for response for other states and cities as they are preparing a response to COVID-19. Next slide, please. So last but not least, in this particular, the first 4 areas is the global applications and projects. One thing I want to mention is that each area has an area leader. And so for business, there is a gentleman from Cisco who leads product development, who's preparing those resources. For cities, it's Gary Dennison, he's from Department of Homeland Security. Each area has a different business leader, area leader. This particular global application project and resources, I'm the area leader for that. The reason that I'm this is a very important area that I feel is because of the large number of applications and systems that we are putting in place to track COVID-19, for enforcing surveillance, for example, There are cities that have brought in technology such as drones to enforce and see how effective the social distancing measures are, even taking things such as temperature, etc. Then there are applications that are being developed with Bluetooth technology, for instance, which may or may not be secure. So there are a large number of projects sprouting up on a continuous basis, which can really lead us to a bigger problem than what we are trying to solve. So we at CPAC, we have a set of volunteers who can, with CPAC and its companion entities, we have volunteers with deep security and privacy skills that can provide validation of security and privacy architecture, design, and implementation. One example of that is the data that is being collected. For instance, when is it going to be sunset? How is it going to be protected when it is being aggregated? How is it being protected when it's on the device, in the database as well as on the device? So just to give you a quick example, let me just pull this up. Hold on one second. My notes on this. After 9/11, FISMA had taken on a wide sweep of data through a consumer-facing application, which was later found to be used for other purposes. Now, the data was meant to be sunset after a specific period of time, but it's still in place today. So as we are collecting data which is sensitive, which may be sensitive, which may have concerns around confidentiality, around personal safety, we need to be really cognizant of what we are collecting, for what purpose, who has access to it, and how is it going to be removed after the pandemic. Next slide, please. We have an area on security and privacy advisories, and advisories including what local enforcement agencies would use. But one of the things I want to highlight is the advisories that we have continually, that we are updating based on state agencies such as DHS, Department of Homeland Security, such as CERT, such as FBI, Department of Justice, the advisories that they are issuing, as well as other entities. One that I like to kind of highlight is FBI had issued out a advisory on the 10 most exploited vulnerabilities that they are seeing, because they felt, and this is a quote from them, because they felt that organizations are developing capability and trying to develop capability by spending a large number of money on technology, for instance, in trying to secure their organizations in this new environment. But meanwhile, the older technology that does exist is not being protected, and is such as VPNs. I talked about virtual private networks earlier, which is a method of, which is pretty much the de facto way of accessing organizational data. And one of the findings that the FBI has is there are VPN structures, infrastructure that has not been patched for years. And so they are finding vulnerabilities that existed 2 years ago or 3 years ago on some of the VPN infrastructure out there. So there is not too much point in investing in new technology for new ways of protecting when the old infrastructure is not even being protected properly. So that is just one example. The other is telework guidance and resources. This, I gave you an example of, collaboration and video conferencing tools. The other is, I was in a financial institution meeting the other day of financial, and some of the members from RIAs, which are registered investment advisors. They had, you can go to the next slide, Riley, as I can talk to this point from both slides. And some of the advisories they had were from SEC around cybersecurity, which were from as far as April of this year, okay, which is a couple of months ago. security and privacy advisories can get outdated in hours sometimes, let alone months. So the value for an organization of any size, and regardless of which sector you're in, when you look at the toolkit that we have, we are constantly updating the resources. So you will have the ability to look at what is relevant to you in your operational and risk environment on a continuous basis. We are very proud of this particular Cybersecurity and Privacy Resilience Center. This is best practices coming from reputable sources as well as industry leaders. I have a document there. I have a resource there called Ransomware Protection Plan. Extremely relevant, and sometimes people think that a good ransomware protection strategy is having a good backup, but just as a clarification, that is not a strategy that will help organizations, because in fact, FBI says not to even pay a ransom, and there is a reason for that. Because if they are charging you ransom for data that they have compromised, then that means the perpetrators are already on your network and they have a foothold there. So just going back to a previous backup may restore your data, but it's not going to restore you as being safe from them, okay? The Privacy Center, this area of the toolkit is organized in NIST cybersecurity framework categories. So what we are giving you here is a live security program. The 5 categories are identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So the resources we are adding over there are, if you have remember the reason for creating this toolkit is for making it free and easily actionable, as well as we know organizations are facing challenges and budgets around resources for toolkits, for security resources, for buying maybe the requisite technology to help mitigate risks. So this is extremely useful because we have put best practices in an area that is very easy to digest and act upon. A lot of organizations have organized their security program around NIST cybersecurity framework. So this is one way of making it easy for organizations to consume that information. So just as an example, remember on the previous slide, I was talking about the SEC's guidance for financial industry around cybersecurity threats, which was from an alert created in April. I'd like to share a NSA DHS teleworking update that was created a couple of weeks ago, as opposed to a couple of months ago. And remember I was talking about Zoom, having that end-to-end encryption, but it's storing the keys in state-owned servers, namely China in this case. So let's take a look at the NSA DHS teleworking update. First point is, does the service implement end-to-end encryption? Are strong, well-known testable encryption standards used? Number 3 is MFA used to validate users' identities? Number 4, can users see and control who connects to collaboration sessions? Number 5, does the service privacy policy allow the vendor to share data with other third parties? And number 6, do users have the ability to securely delete data from the service and its repositories as needed? Now let's take that example I gave for Zoom and plug it into this, right? Now you can see that, does the service implement end-to-end encryption? Yes. Are strong, well-known testable encryption standards used? Yes. Is MFA authentication used to validate users' identities? Let's come back to that one. But even if you have all of these points applied, you still have a exposure and a risk when you're using that particular communication or a collaboration tool. Because even if you are doing encryption, it's using a reputable encryption method or standard, But if the keys are not being secured, then somebody who other than the recipients or the users or the participants can access that meeting data. So it nullifies anything else that you might be using as a way of vetting your collaboration methodology or platform. So it's extremely important to have the most up-to-date guidance. Number three rather, is multi-factor authentication used to validate user identities. Unless you have that, that is going to make it very easy for other folks to get onto the call, for example. But it still does not nullify the fact that even though you have end-to-end encryption, you have the right technique, but somebody else can still get access to that data. And the way to circumvent that is to take a look at a holistic approach to security. And this is a free resource. We're looking to provide all the resources here. If you still have a question, then you do have a way of reaching out to us and asking for help. But I will tell you that even with this, the only point that will help you with that Zoom scenario I talked about is having insight into where those keys are being stored. And that is not under one of these 6. Next slide, please. So last but not least, the last area in the toolkit is guidance on safe and secure return to work. There are a lot of different resources here. There's one that is listed on the screen, we are showing on the screen, is a CDC decision tree on how businesses can open up during the pandemic. As I mentioned earlier, it's really not as simple as do you have the right social distancing or hand sanitization or sanitizing the workplace. There's a little bit more involvement to that. And this is, of course, for workplace. There are other decision trees, decision tools for schools and for other forms of communities as well. Okay, all right, next slide. All right, that is just my contact information. If you need to reach me, my email address is here. And we can go to the first slide now, Riley. Okay, all right, so that's pretty much, the toolkit and the state it's in and what we are looking to offer for whoever needs guidance and help with business resilience, cybersecurity, privacy, etc. How are we doing for time? Let me see. All right. We have, what, 8 minutes left, Riley?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, I'm happy to answer any questions if you have.
And feel free to unmute yourself and turn on your video cameras if you like, if you have any questions for Pamela.
We'll be sharing the link out. At the very least, it'll be great to hear your reaction to, even if you don't have a question, as to what you think of the areas in the toolkit and the toolkit itself. I'll be very happy to hear from anyone.
I think one question that we have on our end is, how do other organizations provide their resources so that they can get on the toolkit link, not just accessing it as a business, but if you have resources that you can provide for businesses or municipalities, how can they connect with your group to get them on your list?
So there is a, on the website itself for the toolkit, which is under the Global Commons org, so under the GCTC umbrella. We have on each part of the toolkit, there is a point of contact. So one can email that email address, or they can just email me directly to get anything, any questions answered, or in terms of consuming the resources, you really just need to access the website and go to the areas that you're interested in. We are looking at adding, so the next iteration of this is to break away from the wiki page, because that is kind of limiting in terms of how interactive it can be. And the GUI component is extremely limited, so it's more of text resources. So as the next iteration, we are looking at upgrading to a full-blown website, and also for adding a kind of a badge of certification. So any site that would want to show that they are using this, any business, for example, they can put it on their website, and we'll be issuing a kind of a badge, so to speak, so that they can put it on their website.
Great, and I put up the link to the GCTC opencommons.org link that you had given me, Pamela, in the chat room, and then we can also send that out to folks. It's actually on the session website for Techlandia Summit as well.
Okay, all right, great, thank you.
Any more questions from the community that's participating? Well, thank you, Pamela, so much for your time and for sharing these amazing resources with our community. I know it's definitely one of the things that's top of mind for businesses and cities and municipalities in our region. And so we really appreciate having another resource to be able to access, to get the answers for questions that are looming out there. And so I really thank you so much for your time. For those of you who are on the call, we have other sessions for Techlandia Summit happening Tuesday through Friday of this week, and we recommend that you go to Techlandia Summit website to be able to see what sessions are coming up. And this session will be available on YouTube within 24 hours of the event. So thank you again, Pamela. Again, we really appreciate all of your support, and we look forward to seeing everyone else at other Techlandia Summit sessions throughout the week.
All right, great, thank you. Thanks for having me.